Hey everybody, Mr. Kevin here, and welcome to the first episode of Table Saw Time with Mr. Kevin. So this series of videos is made for the woodworker who has a few hand tools, a sander, and a table saw, and that's it. That's it. So whether you want to learn how to rip wood, cross-cut wood, make mitered rips on your table saw, if you want to learn how to make jigs on your table saw, if you want to learn how to do different cuts like dados and half laps and finger joints and things of that nature, whether you want to make mitered jewelry boxes or cool looking shelf units that you can put up on the wall, whether you want to make planters or a raised panel, or you just want to learn how to properly mill small or large pieces of wood or even sheets of plywood, you've come to the right place. So I'm going to cover all these subjects and more in this series of Table Saw Time with Mr. Kevin. Yeah! I'd like to talk to you about two things today, and once we get done with these two things, we're going to we'll get rid of them. We don't have to talk about them ever again. So I've just got to get them over with on the first episode, and the second episode will all be on just safety, and then that'll be out of the way, and I know this is all boring. And hopefully you'll stick with me through these two videos because once this is out of the way, we're just going to do nothing but projects on the table saw. Promise. I really do. Yeah, sure. Okay. So in this video, the two things I'd like to talk to you about today are going to be all the different table saws I've owned over the last 30 years. And I know, oh man, he's just going to talk about his table saws. But I've owned every single table saw you could possibly have, from little ones to big ones, cheapest ones to the most expensive ones. And I'd like to tell you what my experience has been with each one. And don't worry, there's only 3. Well, there's 4, but the 4th one is just like it's extra. So we'll just go over those. It won't take very long, I promise. I'll make it short and sweet as possible. And the second thing I'd like to talk to you about is my 7 tips for a safe table saw experience. Yeah, you got to be safe on the table saw. And these are things you need to do beforehand, so before you even flip the switch, there's 7 things I'd like you to do and have with you before you start the table saw, before you flip the switch and get ready to work, all right? So it's because it's kind of a safety thing, and just want everybody to be safe out there because I don't want nobody hurting themselves. Table saws are inherently dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, and yeah, so let's go over the 7 table saw things I'm not talking about right now. Good, I mixed them all together, didn't I? There's my ADHD on 12. Sugar. So the 7 tips for a safe table saw experience are everything you should do and have before you even flip the switch on your table saw. Because that's important. And we're going to go over that, and we'll go over that as fast as possible. And so now, let's just get to the dang table saws and get it over with. All right, here we go. My number 1 table saw that I first got when I was in my 20s. Back in 1988, was a Craftsman 1960s model table saw. So my 1960s model Craftsman Table Saw was a benchtop model. It was 24 by like 30. It had legs that I put on. And there's a picture of something like that right here. Yeah, putting the legs on was a mistake. It had a little fence. It was about 2 inches tall. It was made of metal. Aww. And you would tighten it up with a little screw on the end, and it would hold it in place, sort of. It had an 8-inch blade, which was cool because it was a skill saw blade basically on a table. And I would use that because I had a skill saw, and that's what I was using. I was tired of using a skill saw. I wanted a table saw, so I bought that for 40 bucks at a garage sale. So good thing, it was very light, and you can carry it around and put it anywhere you wanted. Bad thing, it was very light, and you can carry it around and put it anywhere you wanted. Because if you had to cut long boards or heavy boards or wide boards, it just wanted to tip over, and that ain't no good. It also was really good at making dust and had no dust collection system whatsoever. Only thing I had at the time was a shop vac, which I still have, but it had no port to plug it in. It just made dust everywhere, and it was crazy. Another thing about this wonderful saw that I had was it had a huge throat, and I'll put a picture of it right here. Oh my goodness. So where the insert was, the blade, you know, a little tiny 16th inch blade, you could stick your entire finger down next to it. So anytime you cut something small and narrow, like a narrow piece of wood, and you just wanted to cut a little piece off and it had a piece of tail out, I'd make a game out of it and see how many times I can get a piece of wood stuck in a saw for every project I build up. It was like 10 or 12 times a project. A little piece would come back, get stuck in the saw, sit up in front of you and waggle like this. Until you turn the power off and pulled it out. And always do that. Never try to reach for a piece of wood ever when it's in your saw. Just turn the power off, wait for the blade to come to a complete halt, and then pull it out. Well, the only good thing about this table saw was it was cheap, it was lightweight, you can move it anywhere, and it used the same blades as my skill saw. That was pretty cool. The bad things were the dust that it would make. It was very dangerous because it would wobble all the time. You couldn't cut things really long unless you had two people. You could screw it down to the bench and you still had the same kind of problem because even though you tighten that fence up all the way, the fence would move. If you had something heavy on it, it wouldn't hold very well. And that was kind of a problem. But I did learn one thing. I could make a zero clearance fence out of a piece of 1/4-inch plywood. 1/4-inch plywood. So what I would do when I got sick of things going down the fence or down the insert hole, I would set my saw to whatever I wanted. Let's say it's 4 inches and this is my fence. I would take a piece of 1/4-inch plywood with the blade rolled down. I'd clamp it on there at 4 inches and then I would raise the blade up until I had it high enough to cut my piece, and then I would cut my pieces like that. And that worked great because I never got anything going down the saw. It was much safer because it had zero clearance on there. You could cut skinnier boards that way. You wouldn't have to worry about the tail out because even if you cut something you want to cut like 1/4-inch or 1/2-inch pieces, with the throat being that open where the insert is, it's very dangerous. So I would do that, and then if you had to make another cut and you want to make a 5-inch cut, you'd have to, lower the blade, set the fence, push it over, raise the blade, and then use it again. But that's how I made a lot of cuts because 1/4-inch plywood's cheap, and it worked, and it was much safer. So the little tiny benchtop saws they have nowadays are much better than my 1960 model that I bought. So if you're in the market and you are just learning and you want to, don't want to spend a lot of money, my suggestion would be to get a benchtop table saw. You will actually learn how to use a table saw and learn how to use it safely. Yeah, and I think that would be, if you're just starting out, I think that would be a great thing to do. That way you don't have to spend $1,000 on a table saw and find out you don't like woodworking or you're afraid to use a table saw or anything like that. So if you're just starting out and you have a very low budget and you don't want to spend a lot of money, a benchtop table saw is probably the right table saw for you. Yeah, then give it a shot. All right, so my number two table saw I had was a Craftsman 1.5 horsepower Contractors Table Saw. Whoa. So I was at Sears because we didn't have the interwebs back when I was a kid. Walking around, I was looking for a sander or something like that, and I looked up and I saw a table saw, beautiful table saw, cast iron table with the little Sears logo. Here's a picture of one just like it right here. Yeah, it was cool. Had a 50-inch Beastmeyer fence. It had a 10-inch blade with a 1.5 horsepower motor. 1.5 horsepower motor, yeah, and it was belt driven. No direct drive, none of that. Belt drive, 1.5 horsepower motor. It looked huge. Beautiful cast iron table. It was amazing. I'm like, oh my God. And it came with 0% financing for 6 months. Kevin bought himself a table saw. $600. I was sold. I was happy and I had a brand new table saw. Nothing used, nothing old, blah, blah, blah. Brand new table saw where I can make $100 a month payments for 6 months. So this Contractor saw even came with a mobile base. So you could wheel it around your shop, put it wherever you wanted. I actually used it in this shop right here 9 million years ago, back in 1991. And I had that table saw and I would come here on the weekends and I'd build stuff on the weekends and do all sorts of little things with it. And I thought, man, this thing's awesome. I just had my shop vac hooked up to the dust collector in the back, turned it on, it had dust collectors so I didn't have to breathe dust. It ran good. The Beastmeyer fence was amazing. I did find out later that it was out a little bit, but so I had to readjust the fence, and the blade itself was out of whack a little bit, so I learned how to readjust that. So that was a learning experience. I thought, oh, cool. Okay, now I got it all tuned up, and there's a video about tuning up your table saw over here. Simple, easy way to do it. You should watch that. It might help you out. So I was working at a place called Wallace & Hines Bar Building Company in Arcata, California. At the time I had this saw, and I'd come home on the weekends and build stuff, right? A little time went by, and Wallace & Hines got sold. I had surgery on my hand, and I said, oh, screw it, I'm going to start my own business. So I started my own business, and I had to rely on that saw every day, and every day, and every day. And that's when I realized, oh crap, I really like this saw, but it's got one problem. Well, it's got a couple problems, but I'll go over the first one. It was underpowered. When you're in business for yourself, you don't just do one thing and one thing only. Myself, I build everything from staircases to doors to windows, custom kitchens, custom vanities, lots of crown moldings and staircase, everything, whatever. I build everything. And you need to cut wood that's thick like this. And 1.5 horsepower is not enough to cut hardwoods, very thick. I would get, 6/4 hardwood, cherry, maple, oak, and it had a hell of a time cutting. Like some days it would cut, some days it wouldn't. So the best part of that saw was it was a cast iron saw. It was heavier. It didn't vibrate. It had a dust collector system. It had a 10-inch blade with a 1.5 horsepower motor. It was belt driven. It came on a mobile base, and it was $600, and I only had to pay $100 a month for it for 6 months. That was amazing. Okay, now the bad stuff. It was on a mobile base. It was light. It wouldn't cut anything thicker than 1 inch half the time. Every time it had a beautiful fence on it, that 50-inch Beastmeyer fence. Awesome fence system. Works great. I've used it on other saws. Love it. This saw, you'd put a full sheet of plywood on there and you had to rip it in half. It just wanted to tip over left and right because it's a contractor saw and it was on wheels. And you can lock the wheels down and all that and use outriggers and all that. I understand. I had it on there. Even still, when you throw a 4x8 sheet of cherry on there and you got to rip it or cross cut it, it's too lightweight. It started tipping. Started binding. The blade would stop. The belts would squeal. All these things, it was underpowered. You had to feed anything that was thicker than 1 inch so slow that it would burn the wood as you're cutting it. All right, and that was just a total nightmare for me. So I had to find something else. You need to mill 8/4 stock, long pieces of wood, or sheets of plywood. It wanted to tip over, constantly wanted to tip over, even though you could lock that base out, and it would still wiggle. And it wasn't enough, especially when you're pushing heavy, long boards. I did a staircase job in Arcata, which was a huge 15-inch, 2-inch thick Doug fir, old growth Doug fir staircase that you could see through with rake boards on the side where the stairs go up like this. You could totally see through it. It was just self-standing all by itself. I'll put a couple pictures of it right here. Oh my goodness. So cutting that poplar on there, I had those little roller outrigger things that you put everywhere. I had them behind me, in front of me. I had 3 of them in a row just so I could push these huge, because they were like 15 inches wide and they were like 14 feet long when I milled them up, because I had to dovetail them. There's a picture of that right there. So I had to dovetail each side. I'll put a picture right here. So I had to dovetail each side with this huge dovetail thing I made. It was a tapered dovetail, so you could just take the stair tread itself and stuff it in there when it was all set up, and it was all level, and it was kind of fun to do. But the table saw was a total nightmare. But if you're a hobbyist, new to the game, you want something bigger than a benchtop saw, the contractor saw is a great thing, because you can, on the weekend you can roll your car out and you can set it up and wheel it around, put it where you want it, put it outside if you want to, mill a bunch of stuff up and bring it back in. And you can hook it right up to a shop vac if you get a big enough one, and it'll keep the dust down and all that. It works pretty good. It's an awesome saw. My neighbor has one. He loves it. The guy I gave it to, he loves the saw too. He just tinkers around on the weekend. He loves that thing. For me, it was a total nightmare because I wanted to move my business up and up, and I needed something with more power. And I started looking, and I read magazines and all this, and I finally saw the saw I want. And I'm going to talk to you about that right now. Now it's time to talk about the saw I use every single day. Ready? Drum roll. All right, so the saw I have today is a Saw Stop. I purchased it way back in, I have no idea. I think it was 2005 or 2006. And it's 2020 now. I've had it for a long time. When it first came out, I saw the little hot dog trick, and I'm sure you've all seen that on Saw Stop. And that sold me right there, okay? Because I already had 3 surgeries on my hand. Here's a picture of it up here. I got titanium screws in here. I've had carpal tunnel on both hands. I didn't feel like cutting my fingers off. If you could buy a saw that won't cut your finger off, it might give you a scratch or cut you pretty good, but it won't cut it off because the blade will disappear. I was like intrigued. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to check that out. Went down to the local store down here that actually sells tools, and they actually had one. Went and checked it out. So I gave it the training test. Up with the blade, down with the blade. Threw it over at 45, 22, up and down, up and down. The saw, the fence worked great. So my Saw Stop, which is a cabinet cabinet style saw, which means it's heavier and it sits in one place, and you can put it on a mobile base if you want to. Came with a side table, goes out 52 inches, came with a 52-inch fence. SawStop has a 10-inch blade, the V-belt driven, 5 horsepower, single phase, 220 saw. It came with 2 brakes, one for the dado blade set and one for the regular 10-inch blade. I bought a bunch of inserts to go with it. I bought an extra belt, and I think that's all I bought extra. It comes with the miter gauge, comes with the riving knife with the cover on the top, which I threw away instantly because I can't stand those things. And the only downside to this whole entire table that I can think of, this table saw, is the fact that it's $4,500. The only other downside to this saw is I keep breaking off the dust cover latch. So there's a little latch button you push, and then you pop it open and you can go in there and clean it out. I've broken that latch like 3 times. And it was even on one of my 2-Tip Tuesdays for the magnet thing. Put it up here. Yeah. Yeah. What are your fingers worth? $4,500 or $2,000? Because a normal table saw, you could buy a Powermatic or a Delta or something like that, and they're $2,000. So for $2,500 more, is that worth a pinky or a thumb or anything? To me, it is. So SawStop is my recommendation if you want a big cabinet saw. Yeah. Unless you want to spend $20,000 and you go buy a Felder or an ICMI table saw. But for the average Joe like me, $4,500 is a lot of money, but it's something I use every single day. Every single day. And it makes me money. So, yay. All right. And the last thing I just want to talk about really quick is my job site saw. And I have a little Bosch job. You've seen those job site saws. I'll put a picture of one right here. They got the wheels on them with the little base that goes up and down. I bought this thing 10 years ago, probably. 2010. Yeah, probably 10, maybe even longer. I haven't broke it yet. It's a Bosch. It works pretty good. It has a dust collection port and all that stuff, but it's a direct drive also. It's a little bigger motor than my first bench top, but it's kind of like the same thing. You really can't cut big hunks of plywood on it or really long boards because it actually will take 2 people because it's very wobbly. And you can adjust it and all that stuff, but you're usually out in the grass or in the gravel or even the concrete. You put on concrete, level the whole thing out, make it perfect, and still can't do something like 14-foot long boards because it just wants to tilt out, and then you have to have outriggers and all that too. And it also has the same problem as the bench top, is it doesn't cut very wide. Mine goes to like 30 inches, I think, but it's got a throat on it that's ginormous, and you can stick your finger down there, and if you're not careful cutting small things, it will get you. I wouldn't really use them to cross-cut things. I just because they come with a miter gauge, and you can cross-cut things on them. But I would just use a chop saw if you have one, because you're on a job site. You should probably have a chop saw. If you want to buy a job site saw, $300 to $1,500 is what you're going to spend. Most of them cost between $500-600, but I would not recommend that for your first saw. Just because it has the same problem as a benchtop saw, and they're more expensive. It's lightweight. You can't cut wide things on them. You can't cut really long things without using somebody. It has a very large open throat. And I think if you're a beginner, it's just, you don't need that. Just buy a benchtop saw. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. If you're new to the channel, subscribe, like, hit the notification bell, fling, flang, the bang, bang. Tell all your friends. Share it with the world. You have an awesome day. Go outside and play. Hug somebody you love. Be safe out there, and I'll see you next time. Right here on Woodworking with Mr. Kevin. On Table Saw Time with Mr. Kevin. They're both me. All right. We'll see you next time. Bye. All right, and now for the next one, the 7 tips for a safer table saw experience. What you need to have and do before you flip the switch on your table saw. All right, here we go. Ready? And hoop. This thing won't do this or it won't do that, and you find yourself needing something better, stronger, faster, and more powerful. We can rebuild it, just like the Bionic Man. Oh, sorry. You don't want to spend between what you should do and what you have and do. The style saw, it's a cabinet. Cabinet style saw. I need water. Hold on. How does talking make your mouth all dry like that? That's just ridiculous. All right.